Sometimes, when we listen back to the stories sent to us at Revenge Sins, there's a moment of recognition before the words even begin. Not drama, not noise, just the quiet certainty that whatever broke a long time ago and is only now asking to be heard. This one stayed with us because it didn't start with anger. It started with restraint. Her name is Eleanor Price. She works in finance, lives alone in Northern California, and for nearly a decade she has kept her distance from the family that taught her how expensive loyalty could be. This is how she remembers it. I was already awake when the phone started vibrating. Not because I expected it. I just don't sleep deeply anymore. I keep my phone face down on the nightstand, screen muted, like it might suddenly do something I don't want to see. When it buzzed, it didn't stop. It kept going in short bursts, over and over, until the sound felt louder than it should have been in my quiet apartment. I reached for it and flipped it over. 28 missed calls, all from my father. The clock on my stove said 2:17 in the morning. I hadn't seen his name light up my screen in 9 years. Not once. I stared at it long enough that the vibration stopped on its own. My hand was shaking, which annoyed me. I hadn't been a scared kid in a long time. A text came through a second later. "Eleanor, this is serious. It's about Vivian." Of course it was. I sat up and leaned my back against the headboard. My apartment was dark except for the light from the hallway. Everything in it was clean, deliberate. Nothing here belonged to anyone else. I paid for it myself. I chose it myself. That mattered to me more than it probably should have. I didn't answer. I set the phone back down and waited for my breathing to slow. I knew that feeling. That tight, hollow pressure right under my ribs. It was the same one I used to get at family dinners when my father cleared his throat and said my name like it meant responsibility. We've seen this moment before, the pause before a boundary is tested again. I stood up and walked into the kitchen barefoot. The tile was cold. I poured a glass of water and drank it too fast. My phone buzzed again in the bedroom. I didn't go back. I told myself there were only 3 reasons my father would call that many times in the middle of the night. Someone was dying, someone was in trouble, or someone needed me to fix something they'd already broken. I already knew which one it was. I went back to the bedroom and picked up the phone, not to answer, just to unlock it. The screen lit up with another missed call. Number 29. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from realizing nothing has changed on one side, no matter how much you've changed on the other. Before I turned the phone off, I sent one message. "I can't talk tonight." Then I placed it face down again and sat there, listening to the silence settle back into the room, knowing it wouldn't last and knowing I wasn't going to save anyone this time. If you're still listening with us, take a moment before the next chapter begins. Some stories don't ask for judgment. They ask for attention. I didn't always understand what my place was in our family. I just knew it early. When I was little, my father used to stand in the doorway of my bedroom at night, one hand on the frame, loosening his tie. He'd look at me like he was checking something off a list. "You're the capable one," he'd say. "I don't worry about you." Back then, I thought that was love. My sister Vivian was 2 years younger. Softer, quieter in a way that made adults lean in. She cried easily, and when she did, my father reacted fast. Voices dropped, plans changed, everything adjusted around her mood. I learned to stay still. At dinner, Vivian talked. I passed dishes. When she complained about school, my father nodded, serious, invested. When I mentioned an exam or a project, he waved a hand like it was background noise. "You'll handle it," he'd say, and I did. The first time I noticed the pattern clearly, I was maybe 10. Vivian forgot her lunch at home. My father drove back to school to bring it to her. That afternoon, I missed the bus because a teacher kept me late. I walked home alone. When I got there, my father was on the phone, laughing. He didn't notice me until I stood right in front of him. "You should have planned better," he said, not unkindly, just final. That was the tone. Not cruelty. Certainty. As we got older, the gap widened. Vivian quit piano, then dance, then a summer program my father had paid for. Each time, he shrugged it off. She needs to find herself. When I asked to switch one class in high school because the workload was crushing, he frowned. Don't start something you can't finish. I stopped asking. By the time I left for college, the role felt permanent. I handled logistics. I remembered dates. I smoothed things over when my father got sharp or impatient. When something went wrong, he looked at me first. Not because I caused it, because he trusted I'd absorb it. There was pride in that, at first, being the reliable one, the steady one. But pride has a cost when it's assigned, not chosen. We noticed how easily that responsibility settled onto her shoulders, how quietly it stayed there. I remember one night, just before I moved out, my father pulled me aside in the kitchen. He lowered his voice, like he was sharing something important. You understand how this family works. He said, Vivian needs support. You're strong. You can take it. I nodded. That was what I did. It never occurred to me, not then, that strength could become permission. I started working the summer I turned 15, stocking shelves at a grocery store a few blocks from our house. The pay wasn't great, but it was mine. I kept the envelopes from each paycheck in a shoebox under my bed and wrote the totals on the back with a pen that kept running out of ink. That money had a job. It was for a used car. Nothing fancy. Something that ran. Something that meant I didn't have to depend on rides or favors or timing. My father knew about it. He never told me to stop. Vivian didn't work. She tried. Once. Quit after a week. Said the manager was rude and the hours were too much. My father nodded like that explained everything. A few weeks before, I had enough saved. Vivian clipped the corner of a neighbor's fence backing out of the driveway. The car wasn't damaged much, but the fence was wood splintered, paint scraped. The neighbor came over that night, stiff and polite. After he left, my father stood in the kitchen rubbing his forehead. Vivian sat at the table, staring at her phone. He called my name. I came in already knowing something was off. He asked how much I had saved. I told him. He whistled softly, said that was impressive. Then he leaned back against the counter and crossed his arms. We need to borrow that, he said, not asking. Explaining. I remember the exact spot on the linoleum where my foot was when I froze. I said it was for the car. I said I'd been saving for over a year. He nodded again. Calm. This is temporary. We'll pay you back. Vivian didn't look up. I tried once more. My voice sounded thin, even to me. He cut me off with a raised hand. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know we don't have a choice. We noticed how the conversation moved past her without slowing down. I went to my room and pulled the shoebox out from under the bed. I counted the money even though I already knew the number. When I brought it back, my father took it and set it on the counter like it was already his. Vivian got a new phone case a week later. The fence was fixed. The car never happened. I didn't argue. I told myself it was fine. That families help each other. That I'd save again. But something shifted after that. Not loudly. Just a small internal adjustment. Like learning where not to lean. When I walked to the bus stop the next morning, my pocket felt lighter than it should have. I remember thinking that if I could lose something that important that quietly, I needed to be more careful about what I cared about. No one ever mentioned paying me back. By the time I moved to San Jose, I thought I'd finally stepped out of the pattern. New job, new address, new routines. I worked in risk analysis, which felt fitting. My days were about numbers, probabilities, things going wrong before anyone noticed. I liked that kind of control. I paid my bills early. I tracked my credit. I slept better knowing no one could pull the ground out from under me without warning. My father called more once he knew I was settled. At first, it sounded normal. Proud, even. He asked about my office, my commute, whether I liked the city. Then, the language shifted, almost imperceptibly. He started talking about cash flow, about timing, about things being tight for a minute. One Sunday afternoon, he called while I was folding laundry. "Quick question," he began, too casually. "If something came up, you could help bridge it." "Right." I paused with a sock half folded. Asked what kind of something. Nothing dramatic. Just short term. You know how these deals go. I did know. That was the problem. I sent a few hundred the first time. Told myself it was fine. Then a little more. For unexpected expenses. He started using words like restructure and temporary exposure. When I hesitated, he reminded me how reliable I was. How I understood the bigger picture. Vivian's name came up often, always paired with concern. She was between things. She needed space to figure herself out. My help, apparently, made that possible. Once, I mentioned cutting back, not stopping, just slowing down. There was a long silence on the line. "You're doing well," my father finally said. "I don't see why this is an issue." The way he said issue made my stomach tighten, like I'd broken an unspoken agreement. We noticed how the conversation stopped being about help and started sounding like expectation. After that, the calls felt different. Less checking in, more accounting. He'd ask when my bonus cleared, whether I'd paid off certain things yet, if my credit was still strong. I remember sitting at my desk one evening, staring at a spreadsheet I'd made for myself. Transfers, dates, totals. The numbers were neat. The feeling wasn't... I tried to explain once, carefully, that I needed to focus on my own stability, that I couldn't keep being the fallback. He didn't raise his voice. Families invest in each other. He replied, "That's how you build something that lasts." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. After the call ended, I stayed at my desk longer than I needed to. Just sitting there, hands flat, listening to the hum of my laptop. It struck me then that the warmth I used to associate with being needed was gone. What was left felt transactional. And I didn't know yet how much that would cost me. The invitation came on a Tuesday. My father left a voicemail while I was still at work. His tone was careful, almost pleasant. He said he was cooking, said it had been too long, said there were things we should talk about in person. I drove up to Sacramento that weekend telling myself it was just a dinner. I could leave whenever I wanted. I repeated that in my head as I parked in front of the house I'd grown up in. Inside, everything looked the same. The table set properly, cloth napkins folded tight, the good glasses out, even though no one ever really drank much. My father hugged me with one arm. Vivian waved from her chair without standing. We ate for a while before anything happened, talked about traffic, weather, someone my father used to work with who'd moved out of state. Vivian scrolled through her phone, occasionally chiming in about nothing in particular. Then my father cleared his throat. He stood and walked to the sideboard, pulled out a folder, and brought it back to the table. Set it down in front of me. Thick. Too thick for a casual conversation. "I've been working on something," he said. "A restructuring." I opened the folder slowly. Numbers jumped out at me before words did. Line items, projections, a loan amount written in bold. $415,000. My fingers went cold. Vivian leaned forward, suddenly interested. She smiled like this was good news. "It's for my firm," she added. "Interior consulting. High end. Dad's helping me get it off the ground." I looked back at the page. The borrower name was mine. I didn't look up right away. I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb, buying myself a second. "This is in my name," I said eventually. My father nodded. "Calm. You have the strongest credit. It makes sense." I told him I wasn't comfortable with that. Not this amount. Not like this. He didn't interrupt. Let me finish. Then folded his hands together on the table. "I didn't raise you to abandon your blood when it matters," he said. His voice stayed level, almost gentle. "This isn't about risk. It's about family." Vivian watched me closely, waiting. I pushed the folder back toward him. My chair scraped softly against the floor as I stood. "I'm not doing this." The room went still. We noticed how no one moved to stop her, how the silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional. My father stood too. He wasn't angry. That scared me more. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Everything I've built is tied together. If this doesn't go through, that's not my responsibility." The words came out steadier than I expected. Vivian scoffed. "You're really going to do this after everything?" I grabbed my coat. My hands were shaking, but my voice didn't. "I'm leaving." My father followed me to the door. He didn't raise his voice, didn't touch me. "If you walk out," he said, "don't expect us to clean up after you anymore." I nodded once. "I never asked you to." The drive back to San Jose felt longer than usual. I kept replaying the look on his face. Not hurt, not surprised, calculating, like he was already adjusting. When I got home, I didn't unpack. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my shoes, staring at nothing. I thought the dinner was the end of it. I didn't know yet that it was just the point where asking stopped. 6 weeks passed before anything surfaced, long enough for my body to unclench, long enough for the dinner to start feeling like something that had already settled into the past. I went back to work, back to routines. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls that never came. Then, one Tuesday morning, my credit monitoring app sent an alert while I was brushing my teeth. New inquiry. I dried my hands and opened it without thinking much of it. My credit was locked down. I checked it often. This was just habit. The screen refreshed, and the words didn't make sense at first. A commercial loan inquiry, tied to a limited liability company I didn't recognize. The amount made my stomach drop. $398,000. My name was listed as guarantor. I sat down on the edge of the tub, phone still in my hand. Toothpaste forgotten. My heart started racing in a way that felt physical, not emotional. Like my body had already decided something was wrong before my mind caught up. I scrolled. There it was again. My social security number, an email address I hadn't used in years, an electronic signature that looked close enough to mine that it made my skin crawl. I called my father. It rang until voicemail. I called Vivian, straight to voicemail. By the time I got through to the bank's fraud department, my hands were shaking hard enough that I had to put the phone on speaker and pace the living room. The woman on the line asked calm, precise questions. Had I authorized this inquiry? Did I recognize the business name? Had I shared my information with anyone recently? Each answer felt heavier than the last. No, no, no. She told me the application had already moved forward. Income verification submitted. Supporting documents attached? I asked where those documents came from. She paused, then read off the name of a local accounting firm. One my father had mentioned before. A trusted guy. That was the moment something in me went quiet. We've heard this kind of silence before, the kind that arrives when a boundary isn't crossed accidentally, but deliberately. I hung up and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. I tried to line the facts up the way I would at work. Inputs, outputs, risk exposure. This wasn't pressure. This wasn't manipulation. This was fraud. I called my father again. This time he answered. I asked him directly if he'd used my information. There was a beat of hesitation on the line, just long enough to register. "Don't panic," he said. "It's temporary." I had to move quickly. I told him to stop, to pull everything immediately. He sighed, like I was being difficult. "You weren't using your credit anyway." I ended the call without saying anything else. For a long time after that, I just sat there, not crying, not angry, just very still. It felt strange, realizing I wasn't a daughter in this situation. I was a liability, and liabilities get used until they're empty. I didn't call anyone I knew. I sat at my kitchen table for a while, phone face down, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't poured anything into yet. The room was quiet, too quiet for what had just landed in it. When I finally picked the phone back up, I searched for a fraud attorney. Not family law, not mediation, fraud. The receptionist transferred me without much fuss. The man who came on the line spoke slowly, like he expected panic and knew how to wait it out. He asked me to start from the beginning. I told him about the dinner, the loan, the accounting firm, the signature that wasn't mine. He didn't interrupt, just made small sounds now and then, so I knew he was still there. When I finished, he let the silence sit for a moment. "Here's where you are," he said. "You have two paths." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling fan. "First option," he continued, "you don't dispute this. You absorb it. You pay it off over time. You protect your family. Your credit will take a hit. Your future gets smaller." I swallowed. "Second option," he said, quieter now. "You file an affidavit of identity theft. The lender freezes the process. An investigation starts. The people who used your information are held responsible." I asked what that meant. Exactly. "It means law enforcement," he replied. "And consequences you don't control." I closed my eyes. My father's voice echoed in my head. Family. Blood. Responsibility. We could feel the weight of the pause there, the moment when a lifetime of conditioning presses up against a single decision. I told the attorney I needed a minute. He told me to take my time, gave me his direct number. I didn't call my father. I didn't warn Vivian. I didn't ask anyone for permission. I called back 10 minutes later. "I want to file," I said. The process was slower than I expected. Forms, statements, copies of old emails, proof that I hadn't benefited from any of it. Each step felt clinical, almost boring. That helped. The bank flagged the application. The accounting firm stopped returning calls. My credit was locked down so tight that even I had to answer extra questions just to access it. I moved quietly after that, changed my number, opened new accounts at a different bank. I didn't announce anything. I didn't explain myself. The attorney checked in a few times, always brief. He told me investigators would follow the paper trail. He told me not to engage directly anymore. That night, I slept for the first time since the alert came through. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without that tight pressure under my ribs. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was standing still and letting the system move around me. 9 years passed without contact, not because I was hiding. I kept the same job, the same city, the same routines. I just stopped existing in their orbit. I assumed that was enough. It wasn't. The alert came through on a Thursday afternoon while I was between meetings. Same app, same neutral tone, different number, $86,000. Personal business loan, online application. My name attached like it belonged there. I didn't react right away. I read it twice, then a third time. The details were sloppier than before. A new email address, barely disguised. An address that was close, but not quite right. The signature looked rushed. Desperation has a texture. I could feel it through the screen. I didn't call anyone. I forwarded the alert to the attorney I'd worked with years earlier. His son ran the practice now, but the file was still there. My name still attached. He replied within the hour. Short message, calm tone. "We'll file an update. You did the right thing flagging it early." 3 weeks later, my phone lit up in the middle of the night. My father. Over and over. Vivian's name mixed in this time. I didn't answer. The next morning, a voicemail came through. My father's voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Urgent. Controlled, but barely. "There's been a mistake," he said. "We need to talk." I agreed to meet him at a cafe near his old office park. Late morning. Public place. I arrived early and sat near the window. When they walked in, it took me a second to recognize them. My father's shoulders were rounded. Vivian kept her hands tucked into her sleeves like she was cold. They slid into the chairs across from me. My father didn't waste time. He pulled a folder from his bag and set it on the table. "We can fix this," he said. "If you tell them you authorized it, it becomes a civil issue." I didn't touch the folder. I set my own down instead. Thinner, neater. I already spoke to the bank, I told him. And the investigator. Vivian's head snapped up. You didn't have to do that. The words came out sharp, practiced. I opened my folder and turned it so they could see screenshots, IP addresses, a copy of the application with timestamps. I filed 3 weeks ago. I said. When the inquiry hit, the air shifted. We noticed how the room seemed to contract around that table, how the noise of the cafe faded just enough to make the silence heavier. My father stared at the papers, then at me. You turned us in. I shook my head. I stopped lying. Vivian stood abruptly, chair scraping, her face flushed. You could have paid it. You're fine. You always are. I stayed seated. That was never true. My father reached across the table, his hand landing near mine, not touching, close enough to feel intentional. Everything I built was for this family, he said quietly, and you let it collapse. I pulled my hand back. You used my identity twice. I said, you made that choice. Neither of them spoke after that. I stood, gathered my folder, and walked out. The bell over the door chimed behind me. Bright, ordinary. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already buzzing again. I didn't check it. I drove home with the windows down, letting the noise of the road fill the space where their voices used to sit. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to see what would happen next. I already knew. The legal part didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, letters with official letterhead, emails that used careful language, phone calls that stayed short and factual. I read everything. I responded when I had to, most days. I didn't think about it at all. The house in Sacramento was sold. Properties were tied up. Vivian stopped trying to reach me after the investigation moved forward. My father sent one letter, just one. It wasn't an apology. It read like a ledger. Losses. Betrayal. How I had ruined what he'd spent his life building. I folded it once and put it in the same file as the rest of the documents. Closed the drawer. That felt right. My life didn't change dramatically after that. No sudden relief, no rush of happiness. I kept my job. I cooked dinner. I went for walks after work and listened to podcasts I didn't need to finish. Sometimes. I caught myself waiting for the next call. The next demand, the familiar tension that used to sit just behind my thoughts. It didn't come. I realized one evening, while standing at the kitchen sink, that the quiet wasn't something I had to protect anymore. It was just there, stable, uninterrupted. That was new. Eleanor Price spent most of her life believing strength meant absorbing impact, fixing things, being useful enough to earn space. What I learned slowly was that strength could also mean stepping aside and letting the weight fall where it belonged. I didn't lose a family. I stepped out of a role that was never meant to be permanent. Now, when my phone rings late at night, I don't brace myself. I let it ring if I want to. I answer if it feels right. That choice alone changed the shape of my days. If this story lingered with you, even quietly, you're welcome to sit with it a little longer. Some endings don't close doors, they leave room. And for the first time, I'm comfortable in that space.